Guess you feel you'll.
If you could time travel, do you think you'd learn something? I'm not talking about going to the past and acquiring the knowledge to become rich in the present, or anticipating the mistakes you'll make by travelling to the future, then changing the outcome so it never happens. I'm talking about that if you could really time travel, would you learn something about yourself? I think we can answer all of these questions by analysing the ending of Life is Strange, as all of these answers are embedded in the game's protagonist, Max. Life is Strange released back in 2015. This year marks its 5th year anniversary, so I thought I'd rewind the clock, so to speak, and reanalyze the game's ending, to try and convey a new perspective on it after reflecting on the game for half a decade later. This video contains spoilers on everything Life is Strange related, most importantly its ending, so with that out of the way, let's get started.
Time is like a thread, Max. One tug and it all can unravel.
To begin, the game itself might be one of the few true character-driven time travel stories. If you haven't heard the term, stories are usually character-driven or plot-driven, with an emphasis placed on one or the other. Life is Strange is very much character-driven. The effects the plot has on the characters is generally given more precedent than the events unfolding in the story. Let's take the eclipse appearing as an example. It could have ended there on the story reveal that something otherworldly is happening. Instead, we get multiple shots of characters in the town reacting to it. It may be subtle, but this shows the audience where the game's focus is. That doesn't mean its attention isn't focused heavily on its plot, especially in its second half, where its narrative can start to flow like a race to the finish line.
We have to go now.
Its plot is more so presented through the lens of how the events are impacting the main characters, often showing the emotional toll that Max and Chloe are going through as the plot progresses.
I'm sorry, Chloe. I'm so sorry.
So now let's look at the ending. Max and Chloe have reached a point of no return beside the lighthouse. The storm has arrived and it's on a collision course with the town. The game has been outright stating that this is the result of chaos theory, from Max messing with the timeline.
Didn't you say that it was all about chaos theory? I don't see any control over this chaos.
Oh, right. Except for your ability to, manipulate time and space. No biggie.
Max's use of her powers has inadvertently caused this crisis, and now it's unavoidable. It seems second chances do come at a cost. Some people speculate that the storm is Rachel Amber, or at least the result of her anyway, which is alluded to here and in its prequel game Before the Storm, but I'm not here to get into fan theories. Speculation aside, no matter what way you look at it, Max's powers seem to be the source of the problem. Up to now, you've been making consecutively tougher decisions. Now at the end, you're faced with the harshest. Choose to save your friend Chloe or the town of Arcadia Bay. Max's first use of her power was saving Chloe in the bathroom from being murdered by Nathan. Therefore, Chloe is required to be sacrificed in order to reset the timeline or the town will be destroyed. At this point, you've probably shared that friendship Max has with Chloe. She's been with you nearly every step of the way, and you've probably come quite attached to the sarcastic mischief maker.
Don't let my epic plan get in the way of yours. I'll try to scrounge up a Scooby snack to distract his mangy mutt.
Coinciding with that, the town itself has also become a bit of a character in its own right, and you've probably got at least attached to some of the town's inhabitants. If not, you've at least gotten a sense of the town's people's struggle, making you feel the weight of flattening the town on them. This is cleverly framed with the fact that both parties are innocent, and Max is the only one with the power to make a choice from the use of her powers. The very thing that's caused this disaster in the first place.
Chloe, I can't make this choice. No, Max. You're the only one who can.
Either way it works, with the game holding true to that final choice, hitting you with an emotional gut punch of an ending, either with Chloe's funeral or with the two characters driving through the remnants of the level town from the storm. The game has become ultimately defined by its impossible choice, perhaps just by how polarizing it is. The fact that there is no right answer makes both decisions equally valid, something the in-game statistics seem to confirm. The choice is also just a binary one, it's just the town or Chloe. Some people jokingly refer to this choice as Bay or Bay. It can be a little unsatisfying knowing all the players' choices, the nuanced characters and the broad strokes of the plot all just get boiled down into a simple A or B decision. But that assumption might be unkind, as a fundamental change happens by your decision, validating either choice as a legitimate ending. People will live or die by this decision. It's also clear once you reach the game's ending that the plot was building towards this choice the whole time. Chloe must be saved from being killed multiple times, and it seems her death is inevitable up to this point. The town facing certain destruction from the storm is foreshadowed in Max's premonitions, and with all the otherworldly events occurring in it. Most importantly, these both begin to happen when Max starts using her time travel powers, putting Max in the centre of it all, making the plot-ending decision an inevitable choice that was always going to happen. The game was always going to be a teen tragedy after all. The game makes all these points blatantly obvious throughout your playthrough, so it's a shame Chloe and Max literally spell it out at the end.
This is my storm! I caused this! I caused all of this! I changed fate and destiny so much that I actually did alter the course of everything!
I can literally hear the developers shouting, yes, this is what we were going for the whole time. A poor decision in my opinion, but this isn't a review. Regardless, no matter what ending you choose, either one will leave all other choices up to this point invalid. So what was the point? Why does Life is Strange let the player make multiple important decisions up to the ending? Decisions that have shown to save lives and change the town. An uncharitable view would be just to maintain player interest and invest you in the characters, so the ending will have more of an emotional impact. It is a game after all, and it's much easier to get invested when you feel like you're pulling some of the strings. No doubt, at least some of this is true, but I think there's much more to it than that. I think the game is somewhat of a meta-narrative on choices in games itself. Underlining the ending is something greater than a simple pick your poison choice. I believe the ending is a finalisation of Max's character arc throughout the game. Most importantly, you as a player gets to decide what that is. So, what is the true meaning of the Life is Strange ending? To understand the ending, we just have to look at the protagonist Max Caulfield and the use of her time travel powers throughout the 5 episodes. Max from her initial introduction is presented as indecisive. Max will question every decision you as the player makes. Even when you rewind time and make the opposite choice, she will still question it.
No, he does not buy that at all. I may have just flushed my scholarship down the toilet. Yes, I could rewind and actually tell him the truth.
I believe this is much more than just adding uncertainty to the player's decisions. Max as a character is unsure of herself. She personifies the teenage angst and coming of age tale the developers were trying to weave. These character traits is greatly enhanced by the actress Hannah Rebecca Tell. Dontnod took a huge risk in casting someone who's never voice acted before and placing them in their lead role. It's a choice that really shouldn't work, and sometimes it doesn't.
Ready for the mosh pit, Shaka Bra? Maybe not.
But overall, I'd say it paid off. Max's uncertainness and angst comes through well in the actress's performance. So, Max is just an indecisive and angsty teenager, but let's look a little deeper than that. All this questioning of the player's decisions tells us a fundamental truth about Max's character, that Max will run away from her problems. This is probably because she's terrified of dealing emotionally with the consequences of those actions. Even before she got her powers, this is hinted at. Max refuses to hand in her everyday hero photo because she's worried what people might say.
Look at this crap. How can I show this to Mr. Jefferson? I can hear the class laughing at me now.
When Max returns to Arcadia Bay, she never got in contact with her strange friend Chloe. Max probably never wanted to own up to the fact she's the one that caused the wedge in their friendship from not keeping in touch. Even 5 minutes into the game, Max hides in the bathroom when Nathan enters, only reacting when Chloe gets shot. I know things went south fast, and it's certainly a dangerous situation, but Max doesn't even scream out for help or anything. Almost as if she's afraid of what might happen by drawing attention to herself. Max's photo for the contest even has a bit of visual subtext going on. Max's face is turned away from us, hiding it. She's surrounded by out of focus pictures of her work, so no one can see them. This all paints a picture of a character that's afraid to put herself out there for the fear of the consequences. Max's mentality is the embodiment of someone who constantly fears what will happen next. So, it's no coincidence they give this character the ability to change the world around her, so she really must face this fear. In fact, Max's powers actually puts her in a state of perpetual choice. Her powers mean she can control everything around her, so now nothing is set in stone. Everything can change, and she literally has all the time in the world to do so. Therefore, it's hard to make a choice when you literally have millions of choices at your disposal and you can see all the outcomes. In video games, any choice we make lacks consequences because they don't take place in our reality. Max in the game is constantly changing her reality, so the result is practically the same. This is what I meant when I said Life is Strange tells a bit of a meta-narrative on choices itself. What's the point of choosing to do anything if you can't accept the consequences of that action? In real life we don't know the outcomes, we can only anticipate them. Yet we live by those choices every day. In real life, you don't get to take anything back. But in video games, if we can, we'll indulge that need to have everything work out perfect. Most choices in games will impact the ending in some way. So players will literally game the system. They'll learn all the outcomes, and the player is always going to choose the best one. Let's face it, we all want the perfect or true ending, where everyone survives and lives happily forever after. The abuse of the save system is the very representation of that exact mantra in action. You'll reload saves constantly to have it work out the best way, where characters don't die and you're never spotted once. In this case, you're practically time travelling yourself. Every time you reload, you're learning from future outcomes and adjusting accordingly. Really, choices are meant to make us reflect on and realise things about ourselves, rather than just create good or bad outcomes. By looking within ourselves, asking why we made that choice, we can learn, grow and become better. Unfortunately, most games where you're in control allow you to be perfect and never make mistakes. The save system facilitates that. Life is Strange puts that player's crutch in the hands of the protagonist Max herself. She's a player who can reload her save at any time for a more optimal outcome. Life is Strange shows the perils if you could actually live your life like that, displaying the emotional turmoil it would have you in, because there'll always exist a reality where you screwed something up. It's just impossible to fix everything. Or to put it another way, the perfect conclusion just doesn't exist. This all feeds into the grand narrative that choice is pointless unless you're willing to live by those choices. This is at the core of understanding the true meaning of the ending. See, I think Max was given her time travel ability to teach her a lesson. Not unlike the lesson James Sunderland is brought to the town of Silent Hill to learn. Let me explain. There's a sense of inevitability permeating throughout the entire game. Chloe's death and Rachel's disappearance are the obvious examples as they span across realities. But there's a lot more at play here. To start, let's look at the storm. As stated, the game shows from the get-go that Max has been running from her problems, arguably throughout her entire life. Take her and Chloe's relationship as the prime example. So the game sets up the storm, an inevitable force that Max must come to terms with and eventually face. Before the story even has a chance to manifest, Max is presented with this looming threat. In fact, the first scene of the game is the storm about to destroy the town. Despite just gaining the ability to time travel, she doesn't want to acknowledge the connection between her powers and the threat of the storm. So now Max uses her ability to avoid facing that problem. As the days progress, signs show that this is becoming more and more serious. Beached whales, dead birds and strange eclipses. Other characters even directly express a connection between the storm and her powers. Yet Max continues to run from it.
I think it's more than that. Somebody is causing all this to happen.
You think so, Samuel?
You and Arcadia Bay are connected by time and tide.
Max is only focused on the disappearance of Rachel. Throughout the game, you're shown characters who have also been avoiding their problems emotionally, witnessing firsthand the negative effects it is having on themselves and the people around them. David Madsen hasn't let the war go and is now turning the school into a police state, believing everyone at the school is a criminal.
That's why the students and faculty don't like you. You even hit your stepdaughter. I do respect your service, but you don't respect anybody.
Joyce can't accept she is losing her grasp on Chloe and they're slowly drifting apart. Principal Wells ignores the difficulties at the school, allowing it to be run by the Prescott family. Instead of just acknowledging it, he uses alcohol to numb the problem. Nathan continuously lets himself be controlled by his father and then later Jefferson, despite it clearly triggering psychological issues. Frank Bowers believes his drug dealing isn't a big deal, even when it's being used to drug students like Rachel and Kate. You're shown when characters can overcome these issues, like David. and what happens when you can't, like Nathan. I get the sense that all the key characters wish they had Max's time travel powers to help them avoid dealing with these problems, not unlike Max herself.
But if this is about time travel, sign me up.
I just want to point out as well, there's also the idea of pushing everyone into a moral grey zone here. This brings us to Chloe, who's the very essence of repressed emotions. She still hasn't gotten over her father's death. Latel struggles to deal with her love for Rachel being unrequited. She continuously blames Max for leaving as the reason for her life spiralling out of control. But there's actually a point to having Chloe like this. Chloe is not just different from Max, she's practically the antithesis of her. While Max is quiet and reserved, Chloe is brash and outspoken. Max tends to cower from confrontation, while Chloe practically seeks it out. This forms a relationship between the two, where one tends to complement the other, forming a reasonable middle ground, balancing each other out. One could even argue that Chloe is the main character. For example, look how much we learn about Max throughout the game.
Eggs and bacon all the way.
Not much really. On the other hand, let's look at Chloe. We practically know everything about her and her family. See, the game uses Max's and Chloe's relationship to get both characters to acknowledge their problems and help them deal with those emotions. Now let's talk about how time travel is used to reinforce the character message of the game. The game can almost be broken into two halves, showing the two worlds time travel can create. The first half fulfills Max's wish, using her power to create a carefree life, one without negatives for her. The other shows what happens when you constantly avoid facing your problems and the dire consequences that can have. Both show aspects of the mild benefits and the difficulties of constantly avoiding tragedy in your life. Max's first true use of her power is saving Chloe's life from Nathan. After this, throughout the first two episodes, her time travel powers are used to manipulate situations to benefit her. Depending on the player, Max either connects with Victoria or gets their revenge on her. Max will now be considerate in conversations, knows exactly what to say and can get along with nearly everyone. Not too dissimilar to how Rachel Amber is described by other people. It would make you wonder, is there more to the idea of putting Max in Rachel's clothes? Regardless, up to the halfway point, Max's time travel power is unquestionably a good thing. Although something ominous is stirring in the background, Max is portrayed to be a better person to others and has the power to redo most of her mistakes. See, Max's powers put her in a safe space, so to speak, where nothing can really harm her and grants her total control of any situation. This is a place where Max can truly express herself. It's probably the reason why she comes out of her shell as she becomes more accustomed to her powers. It's now easy to kiss a girl like Chloe, insinuating an attraction when you can take it back at any time. Basically, Max can only be herself when she's in total control. Jefferson even says she's been fearless this week. Despite warnings from other characters, in this scenario, time travel is portrayed to be a force for good in Max's life. Even with Kate's fate, this still holds true. In an event connected to the broader story, Kate is drugged and caught on camera being promiscuous. She is then bullied and, for the lack of a better word, labelled a slut. With no help coming from the school faculty and the probable demonisation from her religious family, Kate reaches a breaking point. At the end of episode 2, Kate stands on the roof of the girls' dorm, where she proceeds to commit suicide. Max, by brute force of her powers, manages to rewind and freeze time, getting up there before she can repeat the act. The game sets up a situation where Max is forced to make a conclusion happen that she'll have to live by. Something that Max, thanks to her powers, has been completely avoiding up to this point.
Not now. It won't work. I don't have any power. Now I have to do this by myself.
To make Kate live, you must find some arbitrary clues in her room and whether or not you choose to take a phone call from her. The gamifying of if someone commits suicide or not by snooping around a bedroom for clues is something I'm not going to defend as a compelling mixture of gameplay and narrative storytelling. Although it does highlight Max's powers being a force for good in the world. Max can save Kate's life, preventing a disaster. But even if the worst was to happen and she does commit suicide, well, first, none of it is really Max's fault. The system is what truly failed Kate. Second, her powers still helped somewhat. Kate doesn't die alone, and it means Max will only do better to help others. Nevertheless, whether she lives or dies, it still gives Max and Chloe the necessary motivation, allowing them to go above and beyond to find out who is ever causing this and bring them to justice. The takeaway from all this is that shortly before the halfway point, Max's powers are a net positive for herself and for the most part the people around her. With the possible exception of Kate, Max has lived consequence free up to this point. In episode 3 and 4, the game shifts both direction and tone. This comes to the forefront in episode 3 when you explore Frank's RV. It was believed that Rachel might just be using Frank for drugs. While looking at clues, we find out that Frank has also shared a deep relationship with Rachel, arguably much more than Chloe had with her. This makes Chloe question whether her relationship with Rachel might be more unrequited than she initially believed. Back in her truck, Chloe is clearly upset. Now with the shadow of doubt over her relationship with Rachel, the only person who's been keeping Chloe's mind stable since Max left, Chloe starts lashing out. She now blames Max and her father's tragic death for all her life's problems, showing Max a clear sign of the effects that her previous inactions had over the years on her friend's emotional state. Without Max's help to deal with the tragedy of her father's death, Chloe has bottled up her emotions, now lashing out at the world in anger. The indication here is that you should deal with the problem in the moment, instead of just avoiding it. But Max just can't seem to get the message, as soon after, Max is back in her dorm room, looking at the photo Joyce gave her, depicting Chloe and Max just before the death of Chloe's father. Something strange begins to happen. This is where things start to spiral out of control. In arguably the best sequence of the game, Max is able to travel back in time through the photo, saving Chloe's father, William, from the car crash. See, in its place of dealing with the tragedy with Chloe, having an emotional conversation to each other about the pain she's caused by leaving, instead Max uses her powers to sidestep the problem by just saving Chloe's father. This way, Max doesn't have to deal with the emotional damage she's caused to Chloe, she just changes it so it doesn't happen. As I've said, Max will run from her problems. This section is great at showing how inevitable most events seem to be. It does this by just how many grim ways you can fail this sequence, and it's one spot where the gameplay does most of the heavy lifting narratively, rather than having it play out in just a cutscene. To stop William going to the car, you might try to stop Joyce calling, so you cut the phone line. But then she calls William's mobile phone. You might call Joyce early to warn her, but she's not there. You can hide William's car keys, but then he's got a beeper to find them. It really feels like Max needs to break the timeline.
Yeah, the bus is great.
The game should have had more sequences like this. Back in the future, or really the present, the timeline has changed. Max is now a mean girl, and although Chloe's father is still alive, unfortunately Chloe has gotten herself into a car crash, leaving her quadriplegic. Paralleling the fate of Chloe in the main story, in this timeline you also rekindle your friendship with her. This presents an identical scenario where Max hasn't owned up to the pain she caused by leaving Chloe, showing how defeated Chloe has become after years of no contact. Fixing the timeline hasn't changed Max's inaction, but now Max is forced to face it head on. Eventually Chloe asks Max to euthanize her, and the choice is up to the player. Whatever you choose, Max will grow from this tragedy, allowing her to finally start dealing emotionally with her problems, instead of just trying to avoid them with her powers. Regardless of what happens, you'll end up back in the correct timeline shortly after this. By just how much these sections sidetrack and deviate away from the main story, they must have a point apart from alluding to the fact that Chloe's life is destined to end in tragedy. See, I think the point was to have a clear message about Max using her power. It's that messing with the past will only gloss over your surface level problems. To truly deal emotionally with your difficulties in life, you must face horrible tragedies, because they give you the tools to cope with your issues today. The second half continues with this sort of messaging. At the end of episode 4, Chloe is shot in the head and Jefferson is outed to be the culprit. Max's powers continue to send her down a spiral of tragic circumstances. Despite knowing the future, things continue to get worse. Max manages to resolve the situation by stopping Jefferson, and Chloe is saved in the process. She then goes to a timeline where her photo gets exhibited. Unfortunately, none of it works out, as the town is still about to be levelled by the storm. This is where the game hammers home the message that you can't and never will be able to fix everything. Some things are just inevitable. Eventually Max understands that none of this is going to be resolved by just stopping Jefferson. Knowing now she must face the problem she's been avoiding the whole game, David takes care of Jefferson, after which Max fights her way through the storm. Max, using the photo taken by Rowan, manages to fix the timeline to a point where she can now face the storm with Chloe beside the lighthouse. After an incredibly padded nightmare sequence, Max then chats with another version of herself. Other Max lays out all the problems that real Max has caused with her powers, saying this is the real Max's last chance to fix it. See, Max has questioned whether she is using her powers to help people, or is it just so she can get what she wants?
No, you only wanted to be popular. And once you got these amazing powers, your big plan was to trick people into thinking you give a rat's ass.
The ending is practically right after this sequence, so I believe this was done to have players questioning whether either ending decision is a self-serving choice for themselves or really for the greater good. It tries to put the player in the same frame of mind as Max. See, what other Max tries to get at is, no matter how righteous our decisions appear to be, it will always come with the caveat that we partially made that choice because we thought it would benefit us in some way. This all plays into the fact of how much a character study the game actually is. As filler-like as these sections can feel, I will defend the next part. The events are recapped through frozen snippets. The player has jumped through so many realities at this point, they're probably unsure what has and hasn't happened up to this moment in the timeline, which this section helps to rectify, and by going through all of the emotional beats up to now makes the ending hit even harder. After this, we finally make it out of the nightmare, leading to the game's final decision. This brings us back to the ending at the lighthouse, back to the final choice, where we must pay a heavy price. Chloe price. Up to this point you've been shown the two sides of the time travel coin. One where it allows Max to be herself, help people, and ultimately creates a scenario where she doesn't have to change. Max has just been a victim of circumstance. Another where her decisions come at a cost, with dire consequences. But she learns and grows as a person to be better, even if it means hurting the people around you and going through tremendous pain. Each tragedy makes you stronger. I deliberately ignored all the big symbolism in this analysis, such as all the spirit animals with their Native American subtext. How all of Max's powers seem to be based on things you can do with a camera, even going so far as to put film effects on all of her abilities. I didn't mention how the plot plays out like a superhero origin story, mustache twirling villain and all. Also how the broader strokes of the plot, with the whole history of the Prescott family forming a cult to take over the town. I'm not trying to say these things are irrelevant or don't play into the story as a whole. I only focused in on one area of the game, the characters, to make a point. See, this whole video was trying to show that Life is Strange is very much a character story, with the plot being just a catalyst for the characters. So, isn't whether you'll save Chloe or the town. The decision isn't the plot ending, as most view it as. Instead, it's very much a character ending. The decision is a question about Max herself, about her essence as a character. It's the completion of her character arc throughout the game. The final choice asks the question, will Max continue to use her time travel powers to mitigate her problems? Or will she finally face the tragedies ahead? Can Max accept the consequences, or does she reject them? There are many layers to the ending. Fate versus free will, action versus indecision, whether or not to change, accepting or refusing your mistakes. Both endings, Max is a victim of circumstance. One asks, will Max accept that notion of guilt placed on her, while another asks, will she reject it? The easy choice for Max's character is to save the town, as fundamentally, Max doesn't have to change as a character. You could call this the fate or destiny decision, as this was the implied ending from the very beginning. Chloe must die, as it was destined to happen. This arguably implies that Max will continue to use her powers to solve her problems. Max ultimately accepts her time travel powers as a force needed in the world.
But without your power, we wouldn't have found her!
Although Chloe will die, time travel will save everyone. Max is clean of any wrongdoing up to now. Rachel's body is found, with her powers allowing her to bring Nathan and Jefferson to justice, both before they can cause any more harm, which in turn saves Kate from a torturous ordeal. This all reinforces the idea that time travel was necessary to resolve the crisis. Furthermore, Max has also been given a gift. Max was able to reconnect with her friend Chloe, knowing this is what she wanted in the end. Max arguably won't change or grow as a result of this ending. Emotionally, Max is probably in turmoil, sure, but it was an unavoidable act of fate. Save the town, catch the killer, and rekindle your lost friendship. The Save the Town is the superhero origin story with the happily ever after ending attached. The only tragic thing is that Chloe was able to own up to all of her mistakes. Sadly, it's only right before she dies.
Even though I don't deserve it. I'm so selfish. Not like my mom. Look what she had to give up and live through. And she did. She deserves so much more than to be killed by a storm in a fucking diner. Even my stepfather deserves her alive. There's so many more people in Arcadia Bay who should live. Way more than me.
Or, on the other hand, save Chloe, leaving the town to its destruction, and Max is rejecting her time travel powers. She finally accepts all the consequences of her actions up to now. This is the rejection of destiny ending. Max refuses to let her powers influence her anymore, and she begins to stand on her own 2 feet. For better or for worse, Max ultimately faces the ending with Chloe. In this ending, Max grows most as a character. She will now carry around the burden of the lost town, Chloe being a constant reminder of her guilt. Not unlike an ending of Silent Hill. Although grim, Max is redefined as a character, unlike the previous ending. Max is neither hero nor villain of the story, just morally grey like most characters in the game. Sure, she made mistakes, but all she ever did was try her best. She now truly understands the consequences of time travel. I'd be very surprised if Max ever second guessed herself again in the future. See, tragedies make us who we are. This ending exemplifies that notion. It's really a very human ending, showing that all one can ever do is what they think is best. Is there a lesson we can take away from the game? I believe so. See, I think the Life is Strange lesson is that if you could really change something, would you really want to? You've already faced the consequences of one choice. You've grown and learned from it. You are who you are because of it. One choice made us who we are. Another might make us someone different. Finally, and maybe most importantly, that we're made better by our ability to make tough decisions than we are in questioning them. To put an end to this video, I just want to make one last point. I don't want to make out that Life is Strange is something that it isn't. It's a budgeted game title, a coming of age and whodunit with some sci-fi elements thrown in. There's a bunch of wonky dialogue, annoying bits of filler, the character and facial animations were poor at the time, and age certainly hasn't helped. And let's face it, this is a game where all you do is walk and talk, so the game's priority should have been there from the get-go. It's not all bad though. The plot is where it shines, and although the supernatural elements are incredibly vague, the plot point we all wanted to know, what happened to Rachel, is answered. Not only is the answer satisfying, but it also has enough nuance to have people speculating what really went down. Like, did Rachel really love Jefferson, or was she just being manipulated by him in the end, etc, etc. I can honestly say I was genuinely shocked when I saw Jefferson was the killer, yet it all made sense in hindsight, which tells you it's good writing. Maybe the game shouldn't have replayed the scene of Jefferson in the classroom at the beginning, hammering in how obvious it was. Despite that, and the game arguably not taking that much risk, I think the game was an overall success. This as well defend the episodic nature of the game. Obviously it was done because Dontnod's previous game, Remember Me, failed to reach its projected sales. So, Square Enix had them work on a budgeted title instead. Maybe in spite of that, the game benefited. Although the game shows its budget and age, there was almost no wasted time or effort in the game. Nearly every interaction has purpose and plays into the larger story. There are no overly long explanations, vague metaphors are kept to a minimum, and anything left cryptic is intentionally so. Potentially, if this was a bigger budget title with more expectations, these could have become issues. The point is, there's an extreme amount of focus in this game, so I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that the story is a little deeper than it initially seems. Well, that's just my viewpoint anyway. This has been Jamie on the ending of Life is Strange, and if you've made it this far into the video, I want to thank you for watching.